Hi everybody, welcome back. We're now in topic 5 of Unit 2. We're talking today about the shift from something called the MDGs to something called the SDGs. So it's really kind of a pointless title for you right now. It'll make more sense after we finish. Though you probably encountered both these concepts when you read the book for this unit, the Hanamaki book, A Very Short Introduction to the UN. These are the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals, the main driver of UN action and activity from 2000 to the present. These are overarching attempts to reduce hyper inequalities and to try and make life better for everyone in the world. This is a very different approach, but not a different goal than what was held before 2000. When I was young, when I was in college, for example, if you had a good heart, if you were interested in helping people and you went in and did so, no one really questioned you very closely about whether your methods were successful, whether they bore fruit, whether they were a good idea. The idea basically was that if you helped one person, that you helped more people than you would have if you hadn't helped that one person. So the alternative was none. So no matter whether I was being efficient in my expenditure of time, energy, resources, etc., as long as I helped somebody, I did a good job. But that's not the way it's looked at now, that there can be ways to help more people or to help people without causing harm or to get a better return on your investment. If you want to help more people than fewer people, then you have to make sure that what you're trying to do bears fruit. And one of the ways to do this has been to collectivize action around the world so that the different countries and the different organizations of the UN and different partner organizations are all working towards the same goal. And that's the MDGs to the SDGs that we'll be talking about now. So let's start back here where we were in the last unit, at the UN Charter, reviewing where the power and authority comes from to do whatever it is that a particular organ at the UN is trying to do. This is about the General Assembly, and it's a very open sort of concept here. The GA may discuss any questions or any matters that are contained in the Charter. The only caveat was, and continues to be, that if the Security Council is actively talking about something, they can't do it, but otherwise they can talk about whatever they want. So extreme hunger and poverty, maternal health, education, sustainability in the environment, those sorts of things are well within the purview of the General Assembly to talk about. Now, they do make recommendations that go forth to the rest of the organization for particular organizations to take charge, but they're allowed to talk about them, and lots of discussion begins in the General Assembly. So they can make what this calls, they can discuss it, and they may make recommendations. And the form of their recommendations typically comes in something called a resolution. Now, we've talked about these briefly in other parts of the class, but these are sort of statements of intent that come out of most UN bodies. So the Human Rights Council has resolutions, the General Assembly has resolutions, the Security Council has resolutions, Economic and Social Council, etc. And the way you cite them and you sort of know where they're coming from is from this symbol that you'll see here. Now, the reason you should pay attention to this little bit of the lecture is because when we get to the end of Unit 3 and certainly into Unit 4, when you're looking at specific countries' attitudes and approaches and policies, you'll need to cite documents that the UN has, and that's how you cite them. All you'd have to do if you were citing this document is give me this number. So the A stands for the General Assembly, Res stands for Resolution, 55 stands for the 55th session of the GA. Each session runs from September to August. The first one was in 1945, so that would have been A/Res/1/ whatever number resolution it is. This would be the second one of the 55th session. So you would then be able to add from 45 plus 55, this is 2000. Second resolution. So this is a resolution adopted by the General Assembly. It's within its purview to do so. This followed close upon the time when all the heads of state went to the UN in 2000, and they declared their intent to approach the issues that we're going to look at next. So the issues are right here. They're in the Millennium Development Goals, and in the declaration, they say many things about sort of the world they want to create in the 21st century, but they commit themselves to doing these 8 things. But, as you may recall from our discussion of the UN Charter earlier, and from other discussions about the United Nations and sovereignty and benefits, nothing that comes out of the General Assembly is binding. So it's all well and good that heads of state, followed on by their ambassadors or diplomatic representatives in the General Assembly, can resolve to do something in the Millennium Declaration. and they can organize these Millennium Development Goals, these specific 8 goals to do these things, but it's not binding. So the question is, what's the purpose? What's the point? Why would we care if a General Assembly passed something that had no binding power on any of the member states? And the answer is threefold. So the first thing I will say is that it gives an indication to other funding agencies and to the rest of the UN what the general will of the member states is. So if you declare that you're going to do this, you're going to make this a priority, then the rest of the organization, as well as the NGOs, which we'll talk about in the next topic, as well as individual member states, and as well as, say, funding agencies, are paying attention to what the organization wants to do, and action and activity follows that. So they're being watched, and this gives direction on what is desired. The second is that countries respond to directions of the UN by channeling a lot of their domestic efforts. For example, here's something called the Millennium Challenge Corporation that George Bush started when he was president, that is aligned with a lot of the goals that that are embedded in the Millennium Development Goals, particularly this goal down here about a global partnership for development, where they're looking to sort of change the way U.S. development aid works to help make approaches in these things. And the way they're doing it is by challenging states to be better on a series of about 15 measures on the way that they're governing, the way that their social justice works, the way that their society is organized. And if they meet these levels, then we'll begin to give them aid dollars to work on things in the Millennium Development Goals. So this is not something that we would say is a direct relation from the MDGs, but we're going to channel then some of our development effort there. One of the things that was declared here was that countries would increase the amount of money that they put into foreign aid. And even though you may read occasionally that the United States gives less money in development aid than other countries, it's also true that we have doubled the amount we give twice since this declaration, once by 2005 and again by 2010. And so it may not be at the level that other people hope that we'll aspire to, which would be 0.7% of our GDP. But through the Millennium Challenge Corporation and other efforts, we have increased our stride and made the ways we're doing aid more reliably, I don't want to say scientific, but it's at least one where you're using methodologies of assessment, of testing and verification to make sure they're doing a good job. So these things, the Millennium Development Goals, were in play from 2000 to 2015. And there were improvements made, significant improvements made on all of these things, all of these 8 goals. In fact, some of them make enough progress that it impacts others. For example, if you have eradicate extreme hunger and poverty, improve maternal health, and combat HIV/AIDS, and reduce child mortality, you'll have more people alive than you would have if you hadn't have approached these in such a comprehensive fashion. And if you do that, you may have trouble achieving universal primary education because you have more kids than you would have had otherwise. And so there's sort of an acknowledgement that these are related. And that if you make improvements in one, it may impact another. And so as you begin to converse about what they want to do next, the shift in 2015, there's more of them that goes up to 17. And I have to tell you, there were more than 100 ideas that came out from different conversations that were had in 2014, 2015. We had a couple of students at the University of Idaho who were parts of conversations that were had at, for example, the Clinton Global Initiative that ex-President Bill Clinton founded with Hillary, and they got youth together to talk about youth priorities, youth leaders, and they weren't the only ones that was going on around the world, and so they come up with their ideas on what should be adopted, and you end up with these 17. The 17 are for a lot of observers, better than the 8, not because they're 17, but because it didn't just come from a declaration of the world leaders, but there was a comprehensive process that of consultation that took place around the world to develop the goals. And so there are certainly some people who wanted to have other goals that were in play. As I said, there were more than 100 proposed, but the attitude and approach has been one that we're going to shift towards these things. And when I ask students in different in-class activities to decide how many different sort of pots of effort there are here, they come up with 4 main pots. If you really look at the 17 goals and talk about what they're trying to do, you're trying to meet basic needs is one set. You're trying to improve the standard of living is another set. You're working on the environment, and then you're working on systemic goals of either the economy or institutions, governance institutions. And so you look at these, and they really are a comprehensive approach to development in the 2030 development agenda. So if you look at them now, the SDGs, which are now in play through 2030, they have targets underneath each goal. They have waypoints and measures, things that you want to do by 2020, by 2025, then by 2030. They have conferences scheduled to review best practices, to talk about the way the money's going in, what might have to be done differently. It's a very comprehensive approach. And pretty much all countries, not pretty much, all countries who are donors and all countries who are recipients are on board with these and have channeled their efforts. The same thing with the entirety of the UN system. The same thing with non-governmental organizations, with funding banks, and all kinds of other institutions that you could look at. And because of this one down here at the bottom, number 17, which parallels number 8 from the MDGs, the partnership for the goals are a really important one. We're talking about getting now businesses and corporations involved in reaching these as well, and talking about their role in ensuring that the other goals are reached. Comprehensive, sustainable development goals and channeling the work of countries on into the future. So, where does this leave us? Well, we've got these major approaches that will not be going away in our lifetimes. That instead of just having a good heart and just sort of hoping you do a good job, you're going to measure the kind of job that you're doing. You're going to and you're also not going to just tell the developing countries, the poorer countries, this is what we're giving you. There's a conversation. And there certainly still are instances where moneyed states tell the states that don't have money some things that they should, need, and ought do. For example, the International Monetary Fund, which is an organization that works on macroeconomic and finance policies of a country, may say in the budget, you've messed up the way you're spending your money, and we're not going to loan you money unless you change your ways. And there are a lot of criticisms of that. There's a lot of support for that in different sectors. So it still happens. But through this major initiative of development goals through 2030, it's much more of a collaborative process. For example, the Millennium Challenge Corporation that the United States set up and is still existent, it does make a requirement of the states who want to participate to hit the measures that they set out in those 15 things. But then the money goes and is a partnership in how it's spent. So it's different. It's not quite as one-sided. There still is an element of the haves and the have-nots. But it is the way in which trillions of dollars are being spent over the next 15 years to achieve massive improvements in development through the 2030 Development Agenda.